Do you know what evil looks like when it wears a mask of grace? Picture this, a quiet southern town where church bells echo through red clay fields, where people still leave doors unlocked because trust is law. And standing right there in the center of it all is Velma Barfield, a soft-spoken grandmother with kind eyes, a Bible under her arm, and a gentle smile that could disarm anyone. But behind that smile was something else. Between 1969 and 1978, 6 people died, each one violently sick, writhing in agony, their bodies betraying them from within. Stomach pain like knives, vomiting until nothing was left, death within days. No signs of struggle, no broken locks, no forced entry. And yet, every single victim shared one connection: Velma. She prayed over them as they died. She whispered comfort into their ears while their insides burned, and when they were gone, she wept, convincingly, beautifully. Nobody questioned the sweet church woman who just wanted to help. But death kept following her, like a shadow she controlled. What nobody knew was that this wasn't random tragedy. It was design. Because Velma Barfield had discovered something forbidden, power hidden in plain sight. In Cumberland County, North Carolina, people believed evil came from outside. Strangers, drifters, men with shifty eyes, not from someone sitting beside you in church, someone bringing you sweet tea when you're sick, someone rocking your grandchild to sleep. Velma understood that belief. She weaponized it. By the time she was 37, she had learned the most dangerous secret of all. People see what they want to see. In a world where faith was currency, her gentle prayers made her untouchable. But behind the veil of piety, her life was collapsing. A broken marriage, financial ruin, a growing addiction to prescription drugs, and Velma was desperate. Desperation has a sound. It's the whisper in your ear that says, "No one's coming to save you." It's the thought that blooms in darkness. Maybe God helps those who help themselves. That's when she made her first choice. A quiet one, invisible. A little rat poison mixed in food, just enough to look like illness. A few prayers spoken softly as the pain took hold. And then, death. The community cried for her loss, hugged her, supported her, trusted her more. And that's when Velma realized something chilling. Grief is the perfect camouflage for murder. By the early 1970s, Velma Barfield had become a ghost moving through her own life, unseen, unnoticed, and untouchable. Her neighbors saw a soft-spoken woman devoted to God, a caregiver who volunteered at church, a grandmother who prayed over the sick. But behind closed doors, she was perfecting an art, killing slowly, invisibly, and without suspicion. She had discovered that faith itself could be weaponized. In rural North Carolina, religion wasn't just belief, it was identity. To question a woman who prayed as hard as Velma was to question God himself. Nobody dared. Her second husband, Jennings Barfield, never stood a chance. To the outside world, theirs was a story of redemption. 2 widowed souls, finding comfort in each other's arms, healing through love and devotion. But inside the Barfield home, cracks formed quickly. Velma's prescription addiction drained money faster than Jennings could earn it. Arguments erupted, and Velma began to plan. She started small, quiet. A pinch of arsenic here, a bad stomach there. The beauty of rat poison was its disguise, the same symptoms as natural illness, wrapped in God's timing. Jennings died writhing in agony. The congregation wept. Velma led the prayers, and nobody suspected that God's will was being rewritten by human hands. After Jennings's death, Velma's mask didn't just stay intact. It grew stronger. She stood at his funeral dressed in quiet black, a trembling Bible clutched to her chest, whispering to mourners about God's mysterious ways. They hugged her. They pitied her. They called her blessed for her strength. But inside, Velma had crossed a line she could never return from. She'd learned something profound and terrifying. Murder could solve everything. Debt, gone. Freedom, secured. Sympathy, unlimited. She was a woman forged by poverty, trauma, and rigid faith. But now she understood how to bend those same systems to her will. Velma's addiction deepened. Prescription pills, alcohol, forged checks, all hidden beneath the image of a devout grandmother. When anyone got close enough to see the cracks, they became inconvenient. And inconvenience to Velma was a death sentence. She killed Stuart Taylor the same way, a Pentecostal preacher who trusted her more than his own shadow. Velma nursed him as his insides burned, whispering prayers as he slipped into unconsciousness. To the congregation, it was God's will. To Velma, it was control. And here's the forbidden truth most men never hear. The deadliest predators are rarely monsters. They're caretakers. Velma Barfield understood something most men never learn. Power hides best in plain sight. She didn't need knives, she didn't need rage, she didn't even need strength. She weaponized something far more dangerous. Trust. Think about it. A man will guard his money, his property, his pride, but hand over his life to anyone who makes him feel safe. Velma mastered that. She knew how to lower defenses, how to step into your blind spots and whisper faith into your fears until you saw her as salvation itself. Every victim believed she loved them. Every death looked natural. And yet her motive wasn't chaos. It was survival. Poverty had carved hunger into her bones. Addiction had trapped her in a chemical cage. But Velma didn't beg for rescue. She took control. Rat poison was her silent partner, the perfect tool for a predator cloaked in prayer. 1 teaspoon could bring a grown man to his knees in 24 hours. 2 meant he'd never rise again. By the time the sheriff's department even considered Velma, 6 bodies were already in the ground. Here's the forbidden question. How many Velmas walk among us now, wearing masks we choose to believe in? Faith. That was Velma Barfield's greatest weapon. Not poison, not pills. Faith. In rural North Carolina, church wasn't just a place. It was the spine of identity. If you were Pentecostal, your salvation, your community, your reputation, all flowed through the same steeple. Questioning someone's devotion was like questioning God himself. Velma understood this perfectly. She didn't just attend church, she performed faith. Sunday mornings, she was the quiet, praying grandmother with calloused hands folded tightly. Wednesday nights, she sang hymns loud enough to drown her sins, and when someone in the congregation fell sick, she was first at their bedside, whispering prayers while stirring tea with a poisoned spoon. Faith blinded them. Her victims chose to trust her. But here's where it gets darker. Velma didn't just hide behind God. She became him. She decided who lived and who suffered, who deserved mercy, and who was better off going home. And the cruelest part? She convinced herself it wasn't murder. It was divine will. Every funeral she attended deepened the lie. Each prayer over a coffin cemented her sainthood. Now ask yourself, if someone can hide behind God, who's left to expose them? For nearly a decade, Velma Barfield moved like smoke through Cumberland County, untouchable, unquestioned, and unafraid. But in 1978, one mistake cracked the mask she'd worn so perfectly. His name was Stuart Taylor, a Pentecostal preacher with a heart full of trust and a wallet full of stability. To Velma, he was more than a companion. He was security. But when financial pressures closed in, When her forged checks threatened exposure, Velma returned to her quiet solution: arsenic and patience. The poison worked, until it didn't. Taylor collapsed during a revival service, violently, suddenly, and in front of dozens of witnesses. His agony was impossible to ignore. His body convulsed, his eyes rolled back. The congregation watched a man of God suffer as if cursed. Velma was there, of course, kneeling at his side, whispering prayers with trembling hands. But this time, his family refused to accept the convenient lie of heart failure. They demanded an autopsy. And that's when science spoke, where faith had failed. Traces of arsenic, enough to kill 10 men. Velma's quiet war had been exposed. The townspeople whispered, the sheriff watched. But what investigators would uncover next was worse than anyone imagined. When investigators finally sat Velma Barfield down, they expected panic. They expected denial, tears, confusion, the performance she had perfected for years. But Velma didn't break. She studied them. Every question, every pause, every flicker of doubt across their faces, she mirrored back exactly what they wanted to see. This wasn't just a woman with a secret. This was a woman who had learned over decades how to control the narrative. She leaned on her identity, the grieving grandmother, the devout Christian, the fragile soul who just wanted to help. And it worked, for a while, but the autopsy didn't lie. Stuart Taylor hadn't been touched by God's will. He'd been poisoned. When pressed, Velma switched tactics. She wept, she prayed, she claimed she only wanted to ease his suffering. A caretaker's mercy, she called it. But the deeper they dug, the more her story unraveled. Patterns emerged. 6 bodies, identical symptoms, financial coincidences. Sympathy turned to suspicion. And then, finally, Velma confessed. Not all at once, not with guilt, but like someone testing the air, dropping names one by one to see if investigators already knew them. The truth was darker than anyone imagined. Velma hadn't just killed for money, she killed for control. The trial of Velma Barfield in 1979 wasn't just about murder. It was about betrayal on a scale that shattered a community's faith in itself. The courtroom was packed. Farmers, preachers, widows, and men who had once shaken Velma's hand and trusted her prayers. They came to see if it was true, if the quiet grandmother who held their dying loved ones could really be a killer. The prosecution painted her as calculated. They laid out the timeline. 6 bodies, each poisoned. Rat poison bought quietly, forged checks, life insurance payouts. A symphony of quiet deaths, each perfectly timed. But the defense tried something chilling. They weaponized her faith. They painted Velma as a victim of addiction, a fragile woman trapped by pills, bad luck, and God's mysterious tests. They said she never meant to kill. She only wanted to ease suffering. The jury didn't buy it. Not after they heard the pattern. Not after they learned how Velma always seemed to pray over those she'd poisoned, watching them writhe while whispering scripture. And yet, something unsettling happened. Even faced with overwhelming evidence, some still defended her, some still called her God-fearing, some still couldn't let go of the image she had built. That's when I realized something most men never want to hear. Truth doesn't destroy illusions, it exposes how badly people need them. Inside Velma Barfield's mind, morality wasn't black and white, it wasn't even grey, it was fluid. In her taped interviews after the trial, Velma spoke about murder the way most people talk about making coffee. Calm, thoughtful, almost tender. She described the color of the tea she'd stirred arsenic into, the way her victims would smile at her before sipping, the way they'd thank her for taking care of them, moments before their organs began to fail. But here's the thing most people miss. Velma believed she wasn't evil. In her mind, She wasn't killing. She was guiding souls home. That's what made her so terrifying. There was no sadistic laughter, no cruelty for its own sake. She believed she was righteous. Every prayer she whispered over dying bodies reinforced that illusion. Every scripture she recited became a shield against guilt. This is the psychology of the most dangerous predators. They don't see themselves as predators. Velma weaponized faith, love, and trust. She made people feel safe right up until the moment she ended them, and when the state sentenced her to death, Velma didn't beg. She smiled, because she believed she wasn't going to die. She believed she was finally going home. Death row at Central Prison in Raleigh, North Carolina, is designed to break people. The lights never dim. Time loses meaning. Most inmates either spiral into madness or cling to numb silence. Velma Barfield did neither. In those final years, she became something else. She spent her days reading scripture, leading prayer groups, and counseling other inmates. Guards described her as peaceful, comforting, even holy. Death row prisoners, murderers, thieves, addicts called her Mama Velma. She began writing letters to pastors across the country, claiming she'd been saved, that Jesus had forgiven her. Revival preachers came to visit her, and some even walked away believing she'd been anointed. The media devoured it. Was this the death row granny who poisoned 6 people, or a redeemed soul destined for heaven? Churches debated it. Talk shows covered it. People sent her fan mail, prayer requests, even money. Velma used every second of it. She built a final mask, one of sanctity and transformation. And it worked. By the time her execution date approached, entire congregations were petitioning for clemency. But beneath the hymns and the tears, there were cracks. One guard swore he heard Velma mutter in her sleep, "They trusted me. They always trusted me." November 2nd, 1984. The execution chamber at Central Prison was cold, sterile, and silent, except for the muffled hum of reporters setting up outside. Velma Barfield, 52 years old, walked in wearing a pale blue prison uniform, her Bible clutched to her chest. She looked calm, almost serene, no trembling, no panic. As she was strapped onto the gurney, a prison chaplain stood beside her, whispering scripture. Velma smiled faintly and whispered back, "I'll see Jesus in just a moment." Reporters later said it was the stillness that unsettled them most. There was no fight, no last-minute plea. The warden gave the signal. At 2:00 a.m., a lethal cocktail flowed into Velma's veins. She began reciting Psalm 23, her voice soft, steady, almost childlike. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." By the final verse, her words faltered, her breathing slowed, and within minutes, she was gone. Crowds outside split into 2 camps, those who wept and prayed for her soul, and those who cursed her name, demanding justice for the dead. But here's the most disturbing part. Among her belongings, investigators found a hidden notebook. Inside were names, dates, and strange symbols scribbled beside them. Velma had confessed to 6 murders. The notebook suggested there were more. The notebook was small, leather-bound, edges frayed, pages yellowed from years of handling. Investigators found it tucked beneath Velma Barfield's mattress as though she wanted it discovered, but only after she was gone. Inside, there were names, dozens of them. Some were familiar, her fiancé, her mother, the elderly patients she'd cared for, but others, no one could identify. Next to each name was a date, and beside some dates were strange, looping symbols, a mix of crosses, spirals, and what looked like coded numbers. Investigators at first assumed they marked life insurance payouts or debts owed, but a forensic cryptographer who reviewed the notebook came to a darker conclusion. These weren't financial records. They were ritual markers. Every spiral symbol corresponded to a lunar phase. Every cross matched a church revival date Velma had attended. It suggested her killings weren't random, they were timed. Even worse, several of the unknown names were traced to counties Velma had never officially lived in, places where elderly patients died mysteriously under the care of traveling nurses. A chilling theory emerged. Velma wasn't working alone. Some believe she was part of a quiet network of spiritual caregivers who weaponized faith and trust to move undetected across the South, leaving bodies behind. And if that theory's true, Velma's death didn't end the killings. 6 months after Velma Barfield's execution, a cold case investigator named Harold Winslow tracked one of the unknown names from her notebook, Margaret Ellison, age 71, a widow from Bladen County. Margaret had died in 1975. Cause of death, heart failure. Nothing unusual. Until Winslow dug deeper. Her death certificate matched Velma's handwriting, but here's the thing. Velma wasn't supposed to be anywhere near Bladen County in 1975, and yet a dusty patient logbook from a rural hospice listed Velma B. as a volunteer caregiver. Winslow began connecting dots. 5 other names from Velma's notebook belonged to elderly patients who died under nearly identical circumstances: sudden organ failure, mild stomach cramps, rapid decline. Each case ruled natural causes. But the real horror came when Winslow cross-referenced hospice records. Velma wasn't the only one listed as a volunteer. 4 other women's names kept appearing. Same churches, same revivals, same patient overlaps. When Winslow tried contacting them, 2 had already died under mysterious circumstances. 1 had vanished entirely, and the last, a soft-spoken nurse named Glenda Ray, refused to speak. But Winslow's notes mentioned something chilling. She whispered as he left. "We were told it was mercy." This suggested Velma's murders weren't isolated. They might have been part of an organized belief system masquerading as faith and caregiving. Harold Winslow's investigation led him deep into rural North Carolina, into backwater churches where sermons were whispered, not preached, and where outsiders were watched with cold, unblinking suspicion. Hidden behind one of these churches, he discovered a small wooden shack used for healing revivals. Inside, he found ledger books, brittle with age, ink fading, filled with names eerily similar to those in Velma's notebook. At the top of each ledger was a single phrase written in looping cursive: "Redeemed through release." The doctrine, Winslow learned, came from a splinter sect of a larger Pentecostal network dating back to the 1940s. Their belief was radical. True salvation could only be guaranteed if the soul was released at the moment of forgiveness. In other words, death wasn't murder. It was deliverance. Velma wasn't a rogue poisoner. She was a disciple. The sect recruited women, caregivers, nurses, hospice volunteers, who were trusted by families and congregations. They were instructed to pray over patients, offer God's peace, and when led by the Spirit, end their suffering swiftly. The deeper Winslow dug, the more resistance he faced. Files disappeared from county archives. Clerks stopped returning his calls. Anonymous letters warned him to leave the Lord's work alone. And then, Winslow himself vanished in 1987. His notes were recovered from his home, hidden under the floorboards, the last entry scrawled in frantic handwriting. Velma wasn't the beginning, and she wasn't the end. In 2019, a freelance investigative journalist named Claire Hensley revisited the Barfield case for a true crime podcast. What she uncovered should have made headlines nationwide, but instead, it was buried almost instantly. Claire traced the redeemed through release doctrine to a still active network of underground churches operating quietly across the Carolinas, Georgia, and parts of rural Virginia. Same symbols, same sermons, same language Velma used in her handwritten prayers. Her research linked 23 recent deaths, all elderly, all ruled natural causes, to caregivers connected to these congregations. One hospice nurse, when confronted, smiled faintly and whispered, "Mercy belongs to God, but we help deliver it." Then Claire obtained something explosive, a photograph taken in 1982 at a revival Velma attended. In the faded image, Velma stands shoulder to shoulder with 4 other women, each holding a Bible marked with the same spiral symbol from her notebook. 3 of those women are still alive today. 2 are registered nurses. 1 sits on the board of a rural church. Claire tried to publish her findings. 2 days later, her apartment was ransacked. Her laptop, hard drives, and all paper files gone. She left 1 voicemail for a colleague before vanishing. They're still out there, and they're still choosing who gets released. Velma Barfield's execution was supposed to close the book. Instead, it erased the trail. Some believe the sect is stern, ill-operating, hidden beneath the trust we give to faith, and the people who care for us when we're weakest. And maybe that's why so many of these deaths will never be investigated. Because what if Velma wasn't a monster? What if she was simply obedient?